Hi there, it's Kayla again, and today I want to talk about the how-to of quitting the birth control pill. And so this is going to go over not only birth control detoxification, but also kind of the nitty-gritty of how we can walk through this process. So let's get going. To start, you should always discuss this with your doctor. That's really important. I think that it is something that every woman should and has the right to do, is to talk with their doctor about how discontinuing any type of medication could affect their health. So first and foremost, you might need to make an appointment with your doctor in order to start this process. Not always, not for every woman. Some women have talked with their doctor about this process and might have a plan worked out for that. So the first and most important step in this process is to either choose an alternative birth control option or to plan for pregnancy. Either of those routes are fine, but if you're discontinuing hormonal birth control, you need to consider if you're sexually active, if you want to prevent pregnancy, how are you going to do that? So I'm going to share a video next week about some options that will help if you do want to choose a natural or non-hormonal birth control option. So you can look out for that video if that's something that you need help with. So I do want to share that abstinence is an option, and it might not be the most fun option for most people, but it has 100% success rate of preventing pregnancy. So that is an option for some people if you don't have access to certain types of hormonal birth control, and or you haven't been able to set up an appointment with your doctor and you've made that decision to discontinue birth control that's hormonal. So that'll be something that I just wanted to mention because I think some people don't consider it. Next, it's not super sexy as well, but gut health. Gut health is really important when we're making the decision to come off of hormonal birth control. We have probably spent a significant amount of time, whether that's 6 months, a year, 10 years, 15 years, or even 2 months, we have taken a synthetic hormone that our body has to get out of it. That's how medications work. And so the only real way that a lot of hormones and medications leave our body is either through our intestines or our kidneys. And so in order to support this, one of the best ways is to support our gut health. And so making sure that we're having things that are prebiotic, probiotic. If you don't know what those mean, I will explain that in a few videos. But probiotics are something that you can take. Prebiotics are food that you can encourage in order to feed the gut bacteria that you have in order to keep things moving. And that's one of the things that's most helpful. So gut health is really important because most of our sex hormones are fat soluble. They're going to require our liver to be able to detoxify them because that takes care of fat soluble toxicity and makes it so that things either are removed in our intestines because they are still fat soluble, or it makes them non-fat soluble and we can pee them out so that they're diluted in water. So those are things that are going to help with laying the foundation of supporting our body through that transition. Next is nutritional hormonal support. So what this means is making sure that we're eating things that are going to support healthy hormone production, support our gut health, and reduce inflammation. Oral contraceptives and hormonal birth control options often are inflammatory. They cause inflammatory processes, including stress processes. And so we want to make sure that we are going to provide our body with things that are going to help it recover from having some slight chronic inflammation. So I have some resources linked in the description of this, including things like a meal plan. If you would like to have a cyclical meal plan, you can enjoy that for a whole 28 days. And it is meant to correspond with day 1 of the meal plan, corresponds with day 1 of someone's menstrual cycle. And it is suited to your glycemic adaptability throughout the month hormonally. So when we do this, when we eat foods that our body is more primed to be able to digest and metabolize, we're going to kind of like slip into a natural hormonal production as well as response. So when we are not necessarily as primed to be eating lots of sugary foods, if we have less sugary foods, then we're going to produce less insulin. That's going to cause less hormonal imbalances throughout the month. And so following how our body responds to things and encouraging natural hormone production with things like seed cycling can really help with our body restoring its natural hormone balance, because there are foods that can help with supporting either hormone detoxification or promoting hormones by providing the building blocks for those hormones. So if you want that, there'll be ample information in the description for you to be able to get access to that. Next is to support liver function. So as I talked about, our gut health is going to be important, how we feed ourselves is going to be important, and how we support our liver during this time is going to be really important. So when we come off of any medication, we have these things called half-lives. So you've probably heard of a half-life in like radioactivity, but we also have medical half-lives, how long something stays in our body. And so when we consider that, how long birth control has, and different forms of birth control have different half-lives, and that means how much is going to be in our body at the start, and how long it's going to take to get to half of that dose in our body. And so some of those things we might need to consider. Our liver is going to be the primary organ responsible for encouraging the approach of that half-life and lower concentrations. So supporting that with things like dandelion tea can be really great. That is not only a prebiotic, but it also encourages liver production of bile, and it also can encourage healthy bowel movements. And so all of that can really, I know I probably talk about poop a lot on this channel, but all of those things really help with estrogen removal from the body, especially synthetic hormones. Most of them are metabolized through the liver, and dandelion tea can help with promoting phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification. So those are really great ways in order to be able to help encourage the removal of synthetic hormones that we've been exposed to. Okay, so I have 2 more steps in this process. And the next step is for us to restore hormonal communication in our body. Now, there's a few ways to do this, and really we want to make sure that we're connecting our pituitary gland, which is in our brain, with our ovaries. And the pituitary gland is involved in other hormonal processes as well, things like stress responses. And so when we're coming off of birth control, we have encouraged our pituitary to not produce the hormones that it normally produces on a monthly basis. So that might be a slow process for that gland to get used to producing those hormones again. So this is something to consider, that we have to reconnect those hormone signals. And if those levels of hormones are really low, they could need some encouragement. Now, again, this is where a doctor will be able to help you understand where your hormones are, how they're working properly, if they're not working properly, and what those levels might need to be at in order for you to get to a proper level. And so some of those could include things like herbal encouragement of things like ovulation, FSH production, LH production, estrogen production, progesterone production. And there are ways that we can use herbs in order to encourage those hormones to be produced in our body to restore that connection. We also need to consider that in restoring hormonal communication, we need to reduce inflammation. So these are things that we need to consider, because high inflammatory status can affect other hormones that have a secondary effect on our sex hormones. So those could be things like cortisol. So if we're very stressed, or if we're stressing our body with intense exercise, with other things like stressful situations, then that also can dampen our sexual hormones, because our body is made that if we're in a famine or if we're in a drought, we shut down reproduction, and that's one of the last functions that our body starts back up. And so some of those things, like if we're stressing it out by not eating or eating too much or eating unhealthy foods, then those are factors that could contribute to our hormonal communication not properly regulating again. So these are things that we might need to consider. Working with someone like a wellness coach or a health coach or a nutritionist could be really helpful in digging into this part of restarting our hormonal cycles and coming off of birth control. And last, I wanted to talk about something that I wasn't really aware of how big it could be an impacting factor. And this is going to be our metabolic and our mental health primarily focused. And so some of the things that hormonal birth control can deplete are micronutrients, things like iodine and zinc and copper and magnesium. And so some of those have really big factors on our metabolic health as well as our mental health. And so this is something that I personally had to learn recently. And we also need to consider that some of those can affect more systems than just our reproductive system, and it can put us at risk for things like cancer. So high levels of copper and low levels of zinc, for example. Copper is something that actually comes into a higher concentration as we're approaching potentially pregnancy and the end of our cycle. And so if we have chronically suspended that portion, so we have chronically been in the latter portion of our cycle or in a false pregnancy state from hormonal birth control, that is a high copper state. Copper causes angiogenesis, which is the development of blood vessels, and that is in order to sustain our child. So that is part of that process, and that means that when our body's in a high copper state, we might be dumping more zinc in order to sustain that state. And so restoring micronutrients like zinc can have a really powerful effect on our mental health. But it's really important that you work with a doctor on some of these, because zinc doesn't always have a positive effect on some mental health states. So these are things that probably need to be tested by a doctor so that you know if you're low in some of these micronutrients that could be depleted by hormonal birth control and could be factors in your own restoration. So I would really love to dive in more, but this is a brief video, and people don't watch very long videos. So if you want to learn more, I have a lot of resources in the description of this video. If you want to dig in more, there's even some resources that will help with supporting someone who might be discontinuing birth control, and even further education about their own body and supporting them in that process. So I really hope this is helpful. If you like this video, I'd love if you gave a little like button a nudge, help other people find out about it. And until next time, be well.